I just want to welcome y'all. Thank you so much for joining us for this session on building a cohesive ministry team while working from home. I've been looking forward to this myself. I think we all know Doug. He's a gifted pastor and coach within our conference. We really appreciate his work, and we appreciate the content that he's going to share with us today. And let me just remind you, if you have any comments or questions, please use the chat bar. Would love to hear what you're asking. And Doug's ready with his mask. So
that's right. If any of you get too close, I'm going to put my mask on. I hope you can still hear through the microphone.
Excellent. Well, let's begin.
Are you ready for me? But we're going to do this quickly because I, like you, attend a lot of Zoom meetings, and one of the things that I heard is that we are all overloaded and overwhelmed by Zoom meetings, and the more Zoom meetings we schedule, the worse it gets. So if you're doing a 90-minute Zoom meeting, you're contributing to the problem. How about that? There's one of your don'ts. All right. So over the last couple of months or so, we've been bombarded with lots and lots of information, so much information that it seems like it's beginning to be repeated. There's so many different voices out there. Everybody's saying something different. Who do we pay attention to? So I'm wanting to see if I can pull a couple of things together here, maybe tie some things together into some useful ideas that you can implement even this week or next week. I'm going to move from our cruising altitude of 25,000 feet down into the weeds very quickly. So I hope you don't get vertigo or seasickness or something on the way. So let's begin with some things something that we've all been reading. Next slide, please. We've all been reading this book, right? You got your book in the mail. Canoeing the Mountains here. I can even change it on my back screen. What? I know, but you have control over the PowerPoint. So are you on that? There you go, Canoeing the Mountain, right there. You probably got that. You've already devoured it. You've read it, marked it, eaten it up, right? And you'll remember on page 77, Bolsinger writes, organizational health is a tangible reality that is both worth fighting for and necessary. Organizational health is the single greatest advantage any company, organization, or congregation can have toward accomplishing its mission, and is perhaps the single biggest differentiating quality between successful and less successful organizations. Well, many of us recognize these words. They are from, of course, Patrick Lencioni and his books, particularly from The Advantage, and then also from the 5 Dysfunctions of the Team. So the question is, how do we create a healthy culture? Or how do we change an unhealthy one? We have this little triangle model. Here is Patrick Lencioni's triangle model for what a healthy culture looks like. So this webinar is focused on the first of these behaviors, the bottom piece of this triangle, trust. Right? My experience is that this is the most dysfunctional, the least practiced behavior in churches, particularly with church staff. When I've done this assessment with a number of churches, they're always shocked at how low their rating is on trust for one another. Church staff doesn't trust one another. Okay, let's watch a little video here.
This is my team, my dysfunctional team. It may look pretty normal on the surface, but underneath, there are 5 things going on that need serious attention. Let's take a look. She can't ask for help. He doesn't want to risk starting an argument. He's only pretending that he's on board. That's me. I don't think it's my job to make sure he does his job. And he only cares about his own goals. So that's my team. Maybe your team has its own challenges. In his New York Times best-selling book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, Patrick Lencioni identifies 5 core dysfunctions that most teams face. The first dysfunction is an absence of trust among team members. This stems from their unwillingness to be vulnerable within the group. Vulnerability is about being able to say and genuinely mean things like, "I screwed up," "I need help," and "I'm sorry." Team members who are not genuinely open with one another about their mistakes and weaknesses make it impossible to build a foundation for trust. This failure to build trust is damaging because it sets the tone for the second dysfunction, fear of conflict. Teams that lack trust are incapable of engaging in unfiltered and passionate debate of ideas. Instead, they resort to veiled discussions and guarded comments. A lack of healthy conflict ensures the third dysfunction, lack of commitment. Without airing their opinions in passionate and open debate, team members rarely, if ever, buy in and commit to decisions, though they may feign agreement during meetings. Teams that fail to get this commitment develop the fourth dysfunction, avoidance of accountability. Without committing to a clear plan of action, even the most focused and driven people often hesitate to call their peers on actions and behaviors that seem counterproductive to the good of the team. And this leads to the fifth dysfunction, inattention to results. Inattention to results occurs when team members put their individual needs, such as ego, career development, or recognition, above the collective goals of the team. Another way to understand this model is to take the opposite approach, a positive one, and imagine how members of truly cohesive teams behave. First, they trust each other. They engage in productive conflict around ideas. They commit to decisions and plans of action. They hold one another accountable for delivering against those plans. And they focus on the achievement of collective results. And that's it. These are the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team. Each one is a deliberate choice made by the team. They do require discipline and persistence, but the payoff can be big. And there's a nice bonus. Not only will the group be stronger and more productive, but high-functioning teams are a lot more fun to work on.
All right, thank you, Jackson. Thank you, Wiley Company, for the video about the 5 dysfunctions or 5 behaviors of a cohesive team. Some of you recognize it. Glad to see Scott with us, Scott and Cindy maybe. So there's the 25,000-foot view. Now I want to jump right into the weeds. The issue is, how do you build trust? Let's just talk about that. And the reason this came up for me in the last few weeks is because I was talking to a pastor who said that all of his staff were working remotely, working from home, and he hadn't talked to them in several weeks. And I thought, this is not going to help you come out of this crisis strong. And you know, that's been the theme that we've been talking about for several weeks. How do we come out of this better? How do we come out of this strong? So I'm going to jump right into the weeds now. I've got some ideas about what you can do right now to build trust with your staff. And of course, the first do is Zoom. Do Zoom. Have Zoom staff meetings. If you haven't been meeting with your staff, if you haven't talked to your staff, and by the way, I always define staff as both paid and unpaid folks, right? So your staff meeting might be the folks, your ministry people in your church. They may not be paid, but your staff needs to see you because you're the leader. Just you. Maybe just you and staff. Now, I do think that there's a good reason to invite your staff's family and your family, maybe if you have a virtual cookout. But what I'm primarily talking about is just have a staff meeting. You need to continue to have staff meetings. And so I want to give you then 3 don'ts when you're having a staff meeting, maybe 4. First, you don't know who's in the room when you're having a Zoom meeting. It looks like Vernon is there all by himself, but we can't really be sure. We can't see who's off camera, just as you can't see who's off camera in my room. So think about that. You don't know who's there. I had a person that had been in a Zoom meeting who told me that it was a particularly difficult meeting. The boss even raised her voice a couple of times, and his child was in the room. And after the meeting, his child said, "Wow, Dad, are all your work days like that? Is it always like that at work for you?" Right? So you don't know who's in the room. So be careful about what you say. So don't use group Zoom time to be critical or to do assessments. This is not the time to do the June assessments on Zoom group. Well, now that I've got everybody here, let's talk about who's doing a good job and who isn't, right? No, don't do that. Don't use group Zoom meetings to terminate your staff. That's just nasty, right? You all read this story last week. Weight Watchers got all of their people together. Weight Watchers is now owned by Oprah Winfrey, or a big share of it, right? And they decided to take a whole different business approach. They have a new business model. So they called all their employees together in these regional Zoom meetings, and they terminated them all at once on a Zoom meeting, right? That's a company you want to work for, isn't it? Yeah. One more thing, don't share confidential information in a group Zoom meeting. I don't know why you would share confidential information in any group meeting, but we had a famous or now infamous example of that in our own annual conference. Just a couple of weeks ago, somebody shared in a Zoom meeting with a group some confidential information, and within an hour, it was on Facebook. Yeah, I was even watching as the person posted it on Facebook. So just don't share that confidential information. Again, you don't know who's in the room. So use your Zoom or your video meetings now to build on trust. This is how you do it. With the lines between work and non-work disappearing, uncertainty is at an all-time high. Your team is more and more likely to look to the future and only see doom, gloom, and Zoom, right? But you want them to come out of this with resilience. That's our key word in the last few weeks, resilience. Everybody's saying that, or the ability to bounce back in the face of challenges. It's the key to keeping your team motivated and engaged during these difficult times. Resilient people, this is interesting, resilient people manage their emotions effectively. They feel more optimistic about the future, and this is important to us, they tend to be more generous. Interesting. Resilient people tend to be more generous. Okay, so I have four suggestions about virtual ways to keep your team motivated as this crisis, is it a crisis? I don't know. As this pandemic drags on, right? Here are four steps for you to do. These are backed by some research that's going on. There's a great company out there that's run by, it's called Humu, and they do all this research for us. These are four things that you can do to help your people build resilience and make it easier for them to cope with continued uncertainty. First, prevent further isolation and stop silos from forming. You know, you can contribute to your staff's isolation. So I was thinking about this pastor who said he hadn't spoken to his staff in a couple of weeks, and I thought, wow, they're really isolated now. I mean, first they were sent home to work from home, and now they're not even having any communication, and they're feeling isolated already just from the social distancing that we're doing. Now they're really isolated. So don't assume that your team will automatically band together and call one another in crisis. In fact, the research suggests that they're doing exactly the opposite. When people feel scared or unsure, like they are now, their first instinct is to retreat into themselves. And then all those spontaneous interactions that they used to have, walking into the church kitchen or walking into the church break room or just being in the fellowship center or whatever, those don't exist anymore. So it's easy to see why inclusion and knowledge sharing has dropped over the past several weeks. By the way, who's most likely to isolate, to sort of self-isolate or build a Silo, a self-isolating silo. Not the director of Christian education, not your choir director, not the custodian, not the administrative assistant. Who's left? Yeah, us pastors, most likely to isolate. I mean, things are happening so fast, right? We just don't even think to involve other people. We just go and get it done, which maybe you need to do, but who's getting left behind when you do that? So one suggestion, use some technology such as Slack channels to foster non-work interaction. You can have topics like hashtag pets or just hashtag random thoughts or something to help people bond from a distance. You can lead by example by participating in these channels. I had a staff meeting a week ago and told everybody they had to bring their pet to the staff meeting. I didn't intend to get anything, any real significant work done. We just wanted to know what kind of pets everybody had. It was a great bonding time for the staff. It was really important to them. Okay, next, make it okay to talk about feelings. So, it's a good thing Scott's muted, right? This is really hard for folks like me and Scott because we don't have feelings, right? But chances are your people are feeling anxious. Your staff is anxious. When emotions run high, they bleed into everything they do. I was just listening to a speaker who said when people are feeling anxious, they're more likely to turn to immoral or unethical behavior from the anxiety. Oh, this is not a good sign with your church staff. So your members of your team need to be able to pinpoint, they need to be able to regulate their feelings, and if they can't, then they run the risk of being judgmental, less generous, and eventually unethical or immoral. So emotional regulation, we all know it's a muscle that gets stronger the more you use it, right? So that's part of your role to model that. Make it okay to express difficult emotions by setting an example. Acknowledge that things might be harder than normal. Acknowledge that you're exhausted, that you're overwhelmed. Honestly, though, acknowledge them. Emphasize that you're confident that we'll make it through this together as a team, and then share a little bit about your personal struggles. Maybe it's your struggles with childcare, or it's your struggles with being productive. Maybe you, during this time of home isolation, you don't find it possible to get out of bed at 4:30 to learn Greek or say your prayers or whatever it is that you're doing because John Wesley did it, right? Share some of that with your staff. Next, keep it simple and focus on follow through. This is the time to get everyone on the same page about expectations and goals. It's at the end of every Zoom meeting you have, it's a good idea to summarize, review, pinpoint a specific person whose job it is to do that task. Right? To help individuals stay motivated and continue to make progress, you might make it a priority to reward effort. For example, you could do one concrete way is to establish learning goals rather than performance goals during these times. Maybe you need somebody to learn everything there is to know about Zoom so that they can be your in-house expert. Or maybe you need to set a goal of everybody should read Canoeing the Mountains by the end of next week or something like that, and then have a staff meeting to discuss it. Focus, you could set learning goals instead of performance goals, and then share what you've done. And then finally, reinforce your team's why. It's tempting to focus on the what because, as I say, things are happening so fast. Man, we just got to get the live stream up and running, right? Or we got to get the building clean so that we can open back up. But don't let your team members forget the why because they didn't take this job for the what. They work for you because of the why. It's the why that motivates them. So emphasize the positive impact of your team's work. Set aside some time at your next meeting to ask your team. Find out what they find meaningful in their work. Ask each person to reflect on that. What positive impact do you have on others? And be willing to start that conversation with your own example, the positive impact, telling a story about your own work. Otherwise, your team's going to be crippled if they can't remember the why. All right, your team's going to come back to the church someday, soon. I know, and you're already thinking, oh, darn it. Right? No. When the offices reopen, it's not going to be business as usual. It's going to be impossible to have business as usual. So some things have shifted. Silos have already sprung up. Your people are going to be fearful for their safety. Your team members may not want to return to the office. And when they do, they're going to be anxious still. Chances are your team members are worried about their future at your church, right? Carrie Newhouse and some others tell us that 1/3 of us will not survive the next 18 months. Maybe more than that. I don't know. He tends to be a prophet of doom, right? But maybe, who's going to survive this? And if so, your staff members are already anxious about that. They're going to continue to ask themselves, is my job safe? And they're going to continue to ask, does the church see me as valuable enough to keep me around? So if you leave that unchecked, that anxiety is going to cripple your competitiveness. It's going to cripple your teamwork. So as a leader, you can combat this kind of insecurity. What are the steps you can take? I'm going to give you 5 things to think about. When the office reopens, you can even do these on your Zoom staff meetings if you're not reopening soon. First, involve people in key decisions. Involve people. Like I say, our temptation right now, things are happening so fast, and I just make decisions because it's got to get done. I don't have time to call people, to include people, right? I just make the decision. Try to avoid that temptation. She put together plans for the next few months. Write a quick note to somebody. Write them an email and say, hey, what do you think about this? Those 4 simple words can remind someone that you value their contribution. What do you think? Or give me your feedback, right? It's a simple way to help people feel valued and connected. And I'm going to talk in a minute. You might want to ask people who you wouldn't ordinarily go to on those questions. Don't ask just the obvious person about it, but ask the people who maybe aren't so obvious either. Second, make yourself and your emotions visible. Research shows that when leaders show vulnerability, they increase feelings of trust within their team. It doesn't mean it blow up at them. Don't do that on Zoom. But stay authentic. Let them know that you have general emotions too. One way is to open up a bit about yourself. Even something as simple as starting a meeting with, I know this is a difficult time for everyone. I've certainly been feeling it, and I'm finding it much harder to focus, harder than it usually used to be. Just a statement like that can go a long way. Third, this is interesting, establish a new short-term mission, right? We all know the mission of the United Methodist Church and of every local church is to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world, right? But, okay, we can all say it, but right now, we need something that we can grab. It's tempting to rely on the big overarching mission, but chances are it's not going to be very inspiring at this moment. Not as inspiring as it was pre-crisis, pre-pandemic. So write a new mission statement just for the next 1 to 3 months. We're going to focus on what? Your short-term vision should acknowledge the ever-evolving nature of your ministry context. Still give your team something concrete to rally around. But it could be to drive a key value. Of course, there are lots of folks out there who are saying your short-term mission right now should be to simplify. What are the things that we have found that we don't really have to do to be church? Maybe you just simplify. All right, fourth, I think it's fourth, combat iniquities and support inclusion. I was in a webinar last week where a person was explaining to me how I exclude people. I mean, it wasn't just me, it was all of us. And I thought, no, that can't be, right? I'm the most inclusive person I know. And then she went on to explain how ordinarily I do this, but particularly in Zoom meetings. There are people, like the people that you can't see who just have their pretty picture up there, who we tend not to include in Zoom, right? So you've got to include folks, and you've got to think about inequalities. Sometimes some of those inequalities that I hadn't thought about was, we sent folks home to work from home, but their kids were also sent home, right? And I was thinking about this particularly with Blossom. So does anybody think when the tasks are being assigned, does anybody think, oh, Blossom's work has doubled because she also has to take care of children that she doesn't normally have to take care of, or at least she had a different routine. See, we don't think about the inequalities. Think about the inequalities. If you're going to have Zoom staff meetings, do all your staff have internet? I was shocked to discover that one of my staff members doesn't have internet. She has to pay for data time on her phone in order to attend our staff meeting. So guess what? We pay for that time for her. So consider how to bring people back, to include them and to keep them involved. Make sure you hear from a wide range of perspectives. Then allow space for lower productivity, right, and higher innovation. And that's what you need right now. You don't necessarily need to get everything done. What you really need, I know what I really need, is a lot of innovation. How can we do things differently? Put an emphasis not so much on the production, the productivity, but on the innovation. Especially with those folks who are afraid of losing their jobs. I mean, your children's person right now doesn't think that he's going to have a future because nobody's going to leave their kids at the church. So now's the time to innovate. What does children's ministry mean in a season when you're not going to have close contact with them? Or Barb, here's one for you that we've really been struggling with. How do you do messy church on Zoom? Right? You need an innovation. It's a rhetorical question. You can send me an email later about that. But how do you do that? You need innovation. So ask your team to discuss new things, new habits they've developed in recent months. Make a list of the ones they'd like to continue to do. Maybe you can post those. Maybe you've got a group page or a Google Docs or something. You can start posting those to. All right, returning to the office isn't going to be simple. It's not going to be straightforward. It's going to be a challenge, and if you and your church would like to go deeper into the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team, give me a call. We'll set up a seminar. Now's a good time to do it because the conference is willing to help you with the cost of that. All right, sorry I took 34 minutes. I'll give you a chance to ask questions though if you want.
And folks, please do follow up with Doug. I believe there's an assessment that goes with that, and the conference does want to help with that. It looks really valuable and like it's worth your time. I'm interested in that as well. Any questions or responses? I was pretty impressed with how quickly that went, Doug. Thank you so much. And I took some notes of some ideas to carry with me.
Good. All right, questions? Barbara's coming on, yeah.
Oh, I really like this lower productivity and higher innovation because that does spark people. I've just noticed that. So I'm glad you mentioned it as an item. I'm going to look for that more and kind of just bring it up specifically too, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and I hope the pastors here will also, maybe I'm just speaking to myself here, but we've just been so pressured. When the whole PPP thing came out, I thought that was pandemic performance pressure. And I thought, yeah, I know exactly what that was. I didn't even know it had to do with payroll.
Well, you said that pastors are siloed, and in particular now they're very siloed. And I was wondering from the opposite side, how does staff sort of they're becoming used to carrying that burden and doing like 15 things that they hadn't done before. And I have a sense that a lot of pastors are not going to be really comfortable with offloading some of the things that they've always done. For example, what to do with VBS this year, that kind of thing. So I was wondering, how do staff people kind of address that issue? That how do they help? And from my perspective, my brain is kind of wondering how our conference can kind of help pastors to change the dynamic that they've been living in the last two and a half months.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that Pat Lencioni talks about a lot, and that I really believe, is that there's sort of a new paradigm for how teams work. And churches have been particularly guilty of using the old paradigm for a long time. And here's the old paradigm. We say, oh, we need somebody to work with youth. So let's go hire a youth person who can be in ministry to youth on our behalf. Okay, so just in the very hiring of that person, you've created a silo. You've said to them, go and do youth. But you don't get an opinion on Wednesday night fellowship. You don't get an opinion on Sunday morning worship. Your job is youth, right? So one of the things that staff can do is they can fully embrace the idea that teams are teams and can cross lines. Right. So the best example for us, I think, is right here in Albuquerque, Sandia Labs. Sandia Labs, when they have a project, they will often pull in people that you would never think of to be on that project, but they're just innovative people, or they're creative thinkers. They might be folks who run the office or something. They're not necessarily engineers, but they pull these folks in and they say, this team is responsible for this project, the whole project in all of its facets. I think that's what churches have to do, and church staff has to do. We have to start off saying, I'm not going to be limited to my silo, and I'm going to walk around saying, how can I engage with folks, including youth, or from a youth perspective, how do I engage with folks? So I think staff, they can take the lead on this. I know that and again, maybe I'm just speaking for myself, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I don't have time to even explain projects to people, but if somebody would come in and say, you know what, I know how to run Zoom, could I do your production? That's essentially what happened today. I called up Jackson in the last minute and said, hey, come be my producer. He said, sure, I know how to do that. Well, but he's really the yard man. His normal job is to mow the grass.
So essentially, it's a matter of giving your staff permission to overstep their bounds when you get back to.
Yeah,
I guess it depends on.
I wouldn't use the language of overstepping bounds. I would just say that, our job is to engage with people, to make disciples of Jesus Christ. And yeah, you might be working primarily with youth, but that doesn't mean those are the only folks you're going to engage with.
I guess it all depends on how you have developed your hierarchy in your church. And this might be a good time to change some of those dynamics.
Yep. That's it exactly, and that's exactly what everybody's saying. We've got to rethink that paradigm. Stop hiring people to work in silos.
Yeah, Doug, I was thinking that the coming together for that is great. But but it's, I've also been in situations where there's a lot of silos and there's a lot of people that like to have ideas, right? And so they end up with a lot of people going, well, I have a great idea for what you need to do in your silo. And so, in that silo mindset, I have great ideas for what the other person needs to do. And so that has to have some component of, and I'm willing to do this to help you, as opposed to just throwing the idea. And so, I mean, so that's that health of that team, and maybe back to Lencioni's whole pyramid, you may have to build that from the ground up to
Right.
so that you're at the peak, you're probably functioning the way you're talking. But you don't always inherit that kind of mindset. And even in a church, the culture doesn't necessarily allow that to function easily. And so I guess I guess modeling and then not ever giving up to in those directions. But I've seen that be very difficult, watching people say, let's have a even as a church have a big leadership meeting, and we have different tables of people say, let's all come up with things to do for youth, and all of it is about what they want that one other youth person to do. And it's like, well, that person has plenty of ideas. He didn't really need your ideas, as much as your ministry, support and working on that. So that I just see that as somewhat of that road bump, that bump in the road on that way. But I see the value, and I've been in good and bad situations like that. But when it's working, I think it's awesome. But so I don't want to give up. But thanks for reminding me. And I don't have a bad situation right now, but it's just so important to build that.
Yeah. Well, that's the paradigm that we're changing, as a matter of fact. Yeah. So your wife has learned to say to folks, so what do you want to do? Right?
Yes,
That's
don't tell me about
question.
that. Thanks to you and others, I get coached all the time.
Yes. Yes, I'm sure.
Yeah. You heard that, Blossom. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Other questions?
Well, and it's a good point, because now I'm in a little tiny church, and so we don't have any staff, but you still have people filling those roles. And so the siloing with people where the congregation person is serving the function of a staff in whatever area, those silos are deeply rooted. So to encourage conversation in this newness, which, because I'm new with them, is actually kind of helping, because I'm asking these super innocent questions and noticing certain skills and talents and gifts that people have that no one else, they've been pigeonholed in one thing.
Right.
And so I'm, well, what about so-and-so doing such and such? And they look at me like I'm from Mars, but then it's like, oh, well, we never thought about that. So anyway, it's very good to look at those roles, even though they're not filled with technically a staff person.
Well, even our church polity has reinforced that idea of silos. So when we have administrative councils, for example, we have one of every kind of person on there, right? You have to have one youth representative, you have to have one UMW representative, one men's representative, one person from the choir, one person from the band, one person from the trustees, one person from PPRC. See, they're put on there in order to defend silos. So yeah, I'm not saying this is easy, but we need to do it.
I agree with what you're saying. And one of the vocabulary signals of silo structure is y'all oughta. We call those
y'all oughta. Yeah. Y'all oughta. That's an animal that swims in the water, isn't it? Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Blossom.
Oh, wait, I think
Everybody?
Vernon had a question.
It just reminded me that whatever annual conference we actually came together, Bishop Schnase was sharing about the coming together, but almost if somebody has something to say, you almost discount it unless their statement's followed by, and I'm willing to, and so I think that helps, that mindset of, oh, this is great, and I'm willing to,
right?
Even if it's anything, like I can only pray because I'm doing something else, but I'm willing to be on your team.
And he also added, and here's how we're going to pay for it.
Oh yeah, yeah. So get out your wallet when you start talking.
All right, Doug, I appreciated with all the busyness that we definitely feel now, and there is that temptation to just take it all on our shoulders and run. And for the last months, we couldn't even sit down across from our staff people, and so that just loaded more and more. And thank you for the reminders of ways to re-engage our staff and leaders in relationship, because they need that comfort and encouragement more than ever. This is really, really some good stuff. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. And please, how can people contact you to follow up?
Yeah.
It's 505-359-0052.
Excellent. All right. Well, friends, God bless you. Do not hesitate to reach out to Doug or to me. We are really thankful you're here. It's such a wonderful sign of your faithfulness in ministry and your willingness to go the extra mile to really make a difference. So thank you. God bless you.